I'm Dr. Bruce Metzger, examining with you the book of Revelation. The writer of this book, whose name is John, has carefully laid out a series of parallel yet ever-progressing sections. These display God's plan from different vantage points, stressing one or another feature. At the same time, the different accounts reinforce one another and bring before the reader over and over again the truth that God rules and overrules in the affairs of humankind. In the section we deal with today, the struggle of the church in its conflict with hostile world powers reaches new levels of intensity. Earlier we had read of the opening of the 7 seals described in chapter 6. Then we read of the 7 trumpets announcing additional woes in chapters 8 and 9. Now in chapters 15 and 16, we come to an account of the 7 bowls full of God's wrath. These bowls are poured out successively by 7 angels on the earth, on the sea, on the rivers and fountains, on the sun, on the throne of the beast, on the great river Euphrates, and finally into the air. This succession of plagues is not to be understood as an orgy of indiscriminate destruction, but as the working out of God's justice in judgment upon those who worship the beast. The repeated emphasis on the people's lack of repentance indicates their true allegiance insofar as they continue to blaspheme the living God. The author's descriptive details are not to be understood literalistically, but as contributing to the general effect of intense calamity and terror. The descriptions are descriptions of the symbols, not of the reality conveyed by the symbols. The truth is that the justice of God must bring judgment upon individuals and upon nations that violate the moral structure of God's universe. Like a good teacher, John repeats with kaleidoscopic variety his central conviction that God rules and overrules in the affairs of the church and the world. We might say he sets up, as it were, several mirrors in which the same objects are reflected from different sides, so that the reader cannot fail to take note of them. At the same time, there does seem to be a certain progression in his book. The 7th in each of the 3 series of woes produces another series, similar to the one before, but more terrible. In the 2nd series, the trumpets usher in new disasters, which are blasts of warning, calling men and women to repentance. By the time of the 3rd series, the summons to repentance having proved to be unheeded, further judgments are poured out from the bowls of God's wrath, a picture of swift, uninterrupted, and complete punishment. Now, John's motive for such repetition of woes appears to have been a desire to prepare the church for a period of suffering. Although he's confident that the Lord will soon come and bring deliverance, he does not want to delude his readers with hopes that may be premature. Nothing in the book is more remarkable than the grim honesty with which the writer faces the situation before him. Of course, John desires to comfort his fellow sufferers, but he does not comfort them with any false hopes. Fully conscious of the calamities that await it, the church must prepare to meet them undaunted. The literary artistry with which the man of Patmos has constructed his book is particularly evident in his long middle section. In order to relieve the monotony of a succession of calamities and woes, John provides an interlude that follows each of the 3 series of judgments. In addition, within each series, he has made room for songs of praise as well as expressions of lamentation. With all its seeming confusion, the book has a certain unity, and the skill with which it's woven together can be seen particularly in this long middle section. It is in this section that the author refers to what is commonly called the Battle of Armageddon. When the sixth angel has emptied his bowl of doom, a strange and unusual happening takes place. An unclean spirit, like a frog, comes from the mouth of the dragon, another from the mouth of the false beast, and a third from the mouth of the second beast, identified here as the false prophet. These unclean spirits, pictured as demonic frogs, more dreadful than those of the Egyptian plague of frogs in the time of Moses, perform signs in an attempt to deceive the kings of the earth. The frogs and their croaking represent generally the ability to deceive by means of superstitions and preposterous claims and outright lies. 20th century propaganda, unscrupulously used by totalitarian states, would certainly be a modern illustration of this picture. John sees these demonic spirits as going forth in order to assemble the kings of the whole world for the Battle of Armageddon. This is to take place at a place that is a mouth-filling word, Armageddon. Like the numeral 666, this name has been magnified in popular thinking out of all proportion to its significance as a word. Curiously enough, no one knows for certain what the name Armageddon means. First, we do not really know how to spell it. In some Greek manuscripts of Revelation, it's spelled with an initial H, Harmagedon. The scribes of other manuscripts spell the word with one D and two G's. Other scribes with two D's and one G. Other scribes still with two G's and two D's. Well, in spite of the difficulty of knowing how to spell the word, and consequently what it means and where the place is located, most commentators suppose that the word refers to the mountain of Megiddo. Now, Megiddo was a city at the head of the plain of Esdraelon in Palestine, and this was the scene of frequent and decisive battles in ancient times. Hence, by association, the name Armageddon is used by John to symbolize a final great conflict between the forces of good and the forces of evil, a battle in which evil will be totally overthrown and completely defeated. At long last, the seventh angel now pours out his bowl, and a mighty voice out of the temple cries out, "It is done." Judgment Day for Babylon has arrived. Amid natural catastrophes of unprecedented ferocity, Babylon falls. The 7 plagues end with a bombardment of massive hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds. Chapters 17 and 18 are a triumph of imaginative power. More than once, John had found comfort for himself and his people by proclaiming the fall of Rome. So certain is he that God will judge the persecutors of the church that now he devotes 2 chapters to a vision of the crashing down of the fabulous grandeur that was Rome. To say directly that God will destroy imperial Rome, of course, in the eyes of the imperial police, would have been altogether treasonous. John characterizes the power of evil as Babylon, and he uses the name Babylon in place of the name Rome. Just as Babylon represented to the Hebrews all that was wicked and symbolized persecution, so to John, Rome was another Babylon, the source and fountainhead of all seductive luxury and vice, living in voluptuous materialism and selfishness. Here, John paints a picture of Rome in colors highly figurative and at the same time repellent. Look at her, says John. Look at that whore among cities, the courtesan of the world. Dressed in purple and scarlet, she is resplendent and seductive, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls. Instead of having a scepter in her hand, she is holding a golden cup that's filled with the impurities of her fornications, the abominations of her idolatries. Seated on a scarlet beast that is covered with blasphemous names, the woman personifies imperial power and oppression. The statement that the kings of the world have committed fornications with her must be understood metaphorically to mean that Rome has usurped and perverted the political power of all her provinces. She is drunk, not with wine, but with the lifeblood of the martyrs of Jesus, whom she caused to be slain. The reference here is to wild orgies of persecution, especially the persecution under Nero, as described by the Roman historian Tacitus. According to this non-Christian writer, Tacitus, in the 60s of the first century, a vast multitude of Christians were put to death. Not only that, but put to death with insult. They were either clothed in the skins of beasts and then exposed in the arena to the attacks of half-famished dogs, or else they were dipped in tar, put on crosses to be set on fire, and when daylight faded, then they were burned as torches to illuminate Nero's racetrack at night. Tacitus comments that Nero's persecution of Christians was so terrible that even non-Christian Roman citizens were horrified and tried to intercede in the behalf of the Christians. Well, in chapter 18 of Revelation, John describes the fall of Rome with pathos and realism. The literature of the world contains few passages that compare in dramatic power with this dirge over the fallen city. Like the tolling of a funeral bell, we hear the repeated lamentation, "Alas, alas, the great city, in 1 hour your judgment has come." It's remarkable that when John wrote these intensely moving chapters about the fall of Rome, Rome was still very much alive, still enjoying undisputed sovereignty and undimmed prestige. However, so great is John's faith in the sovereignty of God, and so great is his confidence that the justice of God must eventually punish evil, that John writes as though Rome had already fallen. As with so many judgments of God, the fulfillment actually came slowly, but at last suddenly. For centuries Rome had decayed and degenerated, moral poison infecting her whole life. Then, during a fateful week in August of the year 410, Alaric, with his northern hordes of Goths, pillaged Rome and laid it waste. What do we learn from this part of the book of Revelation? Certainly, John wrote in order to stimulate faithfulness on the part of persecuted Christians living at the end of the first century. He assures them of the ultimate victory of Christ. But Revelation also has a warning for believers down through the years. Babylon is allegorical of the idolatry that any nation commits in elevating material abundance, military prowess, technological sophistication, imperial grandeur, racial pride, and any other glorification of the creature over the Creator. In these chapters, we have an up-to-date portrait of what may happen when we idolize the gross national product, when we worship growth, when we become so preoccupied with quantity that we ignore quality, The message of the book of Revelation concerns the character and timeliness of God's judgment, not only on persons, but judgment also on nations, and in fact, on all principalities and powers, which is to say, all authorities, all corporations, institutions, structures, bureaucracies, and the like. And to the extent that ecclesiastical denominations have also succumbed to the lure of power and prestige, the words of John are applicable also to present-day church structures. We're nearing in the book the end of this series of lessons. Next time we will look at the last 4 chapters, and we will be finishing this amazing book of Revelation.